Welcome to Crypto in Africa webinar, courtesy of Crypto in Africa and Binance Africa. This session has been proudly sponsored by bitcasino.io in conjunction with sportsbet.io, the #1 crypto betting casino and sportsbook in Africa.
Good afternoon for everyone joining us for this interesting webinar that we are hosting today. Is the second Crypto in Africa webinar we are holding for this month, and we're going to be talking about so many interesting topics. Actually, topic today, of course, last week we had a very interesting and extensive discussion around crypto and governance. This guy talking about regulations and what African governments are doing to actually encourage the adoption of crypto in Africa. And today we're going to be picking up after that particular topic and talking about the central bank digital currencies, what are commonly known as CBDCs. And again, my name is Kanali. I'm the tech editor. I am from the TechTrends Media Limited, which is actually a tech publication that covers a lot of information around tech, startups, including crypto across Africa. So thank you for joining us. So again, on set, I'm going to let our other panelists introduce himself.
Yeah, so firstly, I just want to say to Crypto in Africa, thank you so much for having us today. I think, these discussions to bring this knowledge out to the African public is really important. So I am Brenton Naicker. It's a pleasure to be with you today to discuss all things CBDC in Africa. So I've spent the last 2 years running business development, operations, partnerships for Binance in Africa. So if you're in crypto, that's a name that will definitely resonate with you. And then I recently just joined the exciting venture capital space in Africa, which, I think in just 7 weeks of the year, we've already raised $1 billion across Africa in venture financing. So a lot of exciting stuff going on. I think the topic of today, CBDCs is particularly hot with Kenya's recent news, etc. So very excited to delve in.
Oh, great. Totally. Having someone from Binance join us for this session. But a good starting point, of course, will be just to get to understand, these, as you said, with the developments in Kenya and all that. And one of the questions I've been getting actually lately, especially after, Kenya now picked up this conversation, was most actually users really don't understand what central bank, digital currency is. Yeah. So if you actually want to explain to someone in layman, so just to make them understand what, CBDCs are, what would you tell them?
Exactly. Look, so I think people often try to overcomplicate a lot of things in the space, but at a very, very sort of base level, a central bank digital currency, and again, more commonly referred to as CBDC, it's definitely far easier to say, is really just, so we know as Africans, right, our local currency, be it the Naira, be it the Kenyan shilling, be it the South African Rand, it exists in data formats with banks, and then you've got the physical cash, that Africa is quite used to transacting with. But a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, is actually just taking that same unit of currency, be it a Naira, a Kenyan shilling, or South African Rand, and backing it one-to-one in most cases with a crypto token that is redeemable for that currency value. So the same way, for those of you who are more familiar with stable coins in the space, right? Things like USD Tether, where the value of this token is always $1. And it's because it's collateralized and they've got reserves. So what that means is if there's $1 billion USDT tokens, it means that there is $1 billion sitting in a bank account that you can redeem against these tokens. So for all intents and purposes, right, it's just your normal fiat currency represented in a different form, represented in a crypto token. So, for all of you who are probably thinking, hey, maybe I should buy the CBDC and it'll pump. Unfortunately, it is very, very far from a cryptocurrency. So, if you had a CBDC token, it would be almost exactly the same as having a physical unit of currency in your hand. The only difference is that all of those amazing benefits that blockchain drives, right? Being able to transact 24/7, being able to transact really cheaply, transparency. So it takes your traditional currency and it just brings all of these features to it as well. So in one sentence, a central bank digital currency is just a token that is represented one-to-one by your local fiat currency. So it's like having a crypto, an actual e-naira, like we've seen now with the Nigerian central bank.
Oh, and I think we're coming to about actually e-naira, later on. But I think one of the questions, actually one of the concerns, not really a concern actually, one of the things that people actually fail to understand is that, of course, there are thousands of digital currencies, like of course cryptos, out there, which can actually be issued by private companies or even be fully centralized. So what's really the big difference between this, for example, these cryptos and now the CBDCs? What's the major difference?
That's actually a really, really good question, right? So we know a lot of the Bitcoin proponents, right? Some of the things they really love about Bitcoin as an asset is the fact that it's immutable. So nobody can change the transaction data. The fact that it's censorship resistant. So nobody is prevented from, transacting with it. It's purely just software that operates these networks. But central bank digital currencies are very different. So in the case of a CBDC, the sole issuer of that currency is actually the central bank of the country. So they create these tokens and they can actually do so freely, right? So one of the biggest value propositions of Bitcoin is the fixed supply, right? It's got a 21 million fixed supply, but CBDCs don't operate in this way, right? Governments or central banks are free to create and destroy these central bank digital currencies as they see fit. And I think that's one of the key differences. And then the second is a lot of these CBDCs operate in a permissioned environment. And what that means is with my Bitcoin, nobody can, access my Bitcoin. Nobody can freeze my Bitcoin wallet. Nobody can, basically do whatever they want in the Bitcoin ledger. However, with the CBDC, by and large, central banks are largely in control of that ledger. So not only can they issue and revoke currency at will, they can also, prevent certain people from transacting, freeze funds in certain wallets, if you want to call them that. So they are far, far more similar to the normal banking system as we know it than they are to, for example, what we know as cryptocurrencies.
All right, interesting. I mean, Brian is actually back with us. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. We were just trying to discuss basically, the main difference between crypto covering, because I understand we cover so much, content around, around crypto and all that across Africa and across the market. How would you describe the major difference between cryptos and of course central bank digital currencies?
Thank you, Kanali, for the talk again. I think the major difference between a CBDC and Bitcoin is centralization. You see, the CBDC is controlled by the central bank. Compared to a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, that does not have any central entity that controls it, but it's pegged to a public ledger technology called the blockchain. So I think the major difference is that the CBDC is controlled by central banks, but cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are pegged to a public ledger technology, which is the blockchain technology, which helps decentralization.
Oh, right. So decentralization is actually the key thing here. Yes. And of course, we have seen a number of African countries adopt these from Nigeria and now Kenya. So overall in Africa, where are we when it comes to the adoption of this type of currency?
So when it comes to Africa adoption, Nigeria is in the implementation stage. The e-naira, Nigeria is in the implementation stage because the e-naira was launched in October last year by President Buhari, and the main thing he said was that in the next 10 years, the e-naira would make the Nigerian GDP grow to $29 billion. Now, compared to other countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, those are in the research phase. So Nigeria is already in the implementation phase. But now Kenya, Ghana, Tanzania, Zambia are in the research phase. As you saw the rollout of the poll by the Central Bank of Kenya.
All right, interesting. Brenton?
Yeah, so look, I think Brian actually outlined it quite nicely, and we've seen a lot of interest being sparked, particularly over the last 2 years. So, I mean, let's not also forget South Africa. I think about 2 years ago, they ran Project Ikorka, which was really like a little sandbox environment to test out the CBDC environment. Like Brian said, you know, the e-Naira is now live and operational in the Nigerian market. And we've got countries like Ghana, Zambia, who are all, like Brian said, in that research phase, trying to understand, okay, we want to bring out this digital CBDC now, but what are the implications? You know, what design should we use? How should it work? And they're busy just collecting all of that feedback at the moment to move to that implementation stage. And I think the most recent one we've seen that I'm actually quite excited about is the CBK, or the Central Bank of Kenya, you know, opening up the discussion paper for comment to find out from the public, you know, what do you think of this idea? Is there anything, you know, you think we should change? You know, how do the stakeholders in the ecosystem feel about it? So I think there's still a lot of questions to be answered about the actual value that they'll deliver to these economies. But in terms of the interest, the African economy is very, very hot on CBDCs right now. You know, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, probably 3 of our biggest economies in Africa, are all in some way meaningfully engaging in the CBDC space.
All right, interesting. Actually, I'm actually reading an article here about, you know, even countries like Zambia, the mark of Zambia actually even going the CBDC way as well. Interesting.
It's very, very interesting. So I think what excited me more is these big economies, really, you know, because they really have the opportunity to change the face of Africa if they can, you know, get a few things right. Things like, you know, inter-African remittance, cross-border remittances, you know, 24/7 micropayments. There's a lot of efficiencies that can be driven by these. But like I said, I think it's yet to be seen whether these will actually come to fruition or not. But I think it's definitely a very exciting stage.
All right. And now, I mean, Brian, why do you need this currency? Why do you really need it?
I think the CBDC, one thing, it's going to the financial inclusion, financial inclusion part. For example, all over the world, the unbanked population is 2 billion people, and in sub-Saharan Africa, that figure is 350 million. That's almost 17% of the global population. So now with the CBDC, it will, you know, the central bank will tell people, open this low-cost account where your CBDC stored. So in a way, it is going to entice more people to financial inclusion, the unbanked population, because now the CBD, the central bank, will caution people to open digital wallets where they'll store their CBDs. So that's one. So financial inclusion is going to propel more people to financial inclusion on African soil, where 350 million people are unbanked. So that's one of the benefit I see about CBDC. So I think the digital, going the digital way is going to trigger more economic prosperities on African soil.
Right. I mean, Brenton, there's also been, you know, the debate around, you know, potential for inflation.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, we've seen that globally, and you know, it's been taking hold in some of the leading markets. And I think, you know, it's very important for people to understand that, you know, because of the way these operate, like Brian said, centralized, right? So the creation of the CBDC supply is completely controlled by the centralized party. So essentially the same mechanisms that are in place that creates inflation, you know, just over accommodating monetary policy, it's still completely possible with CBDCs, right? So I don't think that's an issue that they've really addressed with the CBDC. But just to even add to Brian's point, you know, I think Africa really is the hotbed of opportunities for blockchain technology and CBDCs, because, you know, in a lot of these first world countries, the assets or crypto and Bitcoin, blockchain, it's really viewed as a speculative asset class. You know, hey, you know, we'll invest some money, we'll make some money. But I think Africa is really showing us the use cases. So, I mean, everything from, you know, people purchasing stable coins to hedge themselves against inflation, hedge themselves against local currency devaluations. But some of the biggest, I think, value drivers of CBDCs in Africa specifically is, a lot of people don't know this, but just in terms of the leaking of economic value. So in emerging markets, on average, it takes between 1 and 3% of GDP to handle cash in the economy. So 1 to 3% of GDP in the economy is literally just going to pay people with metal vans to drive around with pieces of paper and keep them safe. You know, paying people to build huge structures to put pieces of paper in to keep them safe. And this is a huge potential leakage from the economy. So imagine with the CBDC eliminating all of those frictions, you can now pump that 1 to 3% of GDP, which is significant, back into the African country. And then further on that, interoperability. I mean, you know, sub-Saharan Africa is plagued by, I think, one of the worst remittance environments in the world. On average, I think it costs, you know, around 10% and a number of days for people to actually remit any significant amount of money into Africa, you know, a lot of the diaspora, etc. And that's been one of the challenges as well. So I think that CBDCs will allow Africa to really accelerate that economic inclusion, because even in terms of interoperability. So, I mean, imagine the e-Naira and, you know, if the CBK comes out with their CBDC are now interoperable. That would make the trade corridor between Nigeria and Kenya so much more frictionless. It would make it so much easier to transact. And further to that, the ability to make micropayments, the ability to transact 24/7. So if your bank is closed and you ever try to make the transfer, you know, good luck to you. You know, if you ever tried to make a payment to someone for, you know, 10 US cents, you would have probably been charged $1. But now with CBDCs and the underlying technology that empowers them, all of these things become possible. Micropayments, you know, improving efficiencies for cross-border remittances in Africa and also emanating into Africa. So there is a lot of benefit to these CBDCs that actually translates to the people on the ground. So I'm really excited to start seeing these, you know, come into the economic sphere, to start to see the results of these things.
Oh, interesting. And actually, Brian, said something about the unbanked. I remember when, at the launch of the e-Naira, you know, back in October 2021, the Central Bank of Nigeria governor was saying how 500 million naira, which actually equates to around, you know, $1.21 million had already been minted, yeah. And what Nigeria is doing actually currently, like only account holders can access the e-Naira, basically setting up with the you know, the Nigeria's BVN bank identity, yeah. So based on these figures, you know, it actually tells you how massive, you know, the growth is going to be, especially in Nigeria, considering the, you know, the high population and all that, you know. And actually, Brian, you can step in, you know, how does the future look like, you know, based on these numbers in Nigeria we are seeing, yeah? And you know how big Africa is, you know, now we are having Kenya with population, you know how big the unbanked population is, especially here as well. So what does it tell you about the future of, you know,
Okay, thank you, Kanali. Let me first of all describe it. There are two types of CBDCs. There's the wholesale and the retail. So the wholesale is used by private banks and the central banks for interbank transfers. So in a way, it's going to, as Brenton said, now the bank reserve deposits that are held by the central banks will be transformed into a digital token. So by so doing, it circumvents the debit and banking system. So that the cost of minimization is there. Now on the retail CBDC part is now the way you can transact, you and me. So what happens is, for example, M-Pesa is a digital form, yeah. But now there's an intermediary.
Yeah.
In that Safaricom is an intermediary, and so Safaricom is an intermediary. That's why the prices goes up. But now with the CBDC, it will be direct between you and me. So the intermediary part is eliminated by the blockchain technology, which creates the trust. So as Brenton said, that trickles down to growth in the GDP, because when you eliminate middlemen, you expect growth.
Yeah.
So because that's one of the problems we have in Africa. Middlemen go with a big chunk of
yeah,
and
true.
usually, you know, there's usually a long line of them between you and the person at the other end.
Yeah. So I see the CBDC is going to ignite growth on African soil by, one, minimizing cost, and also bringing foreign levy taxes, capital inflows, more capital inflows into the country, into the African soil continent as a whole. And you can see with the Naira, as President Buhari said, he launched the e-Naira last year in October. He said he expects the GDP growth to be $29 billion in the next 10 years, which is
that's a
quite
big figure. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, interesting. And just Brenton, you can pick up from there as well. Where do you see this moving forward? What does the future look?
So look, in an ideal world, right, what I would love to see is, I think one of the key things to strengthen the African economy is for there to be a key focus on the interoperability of these CBDCs. And that's really, really gonna simplify trade between corridors, simplify commerce between countries, and really create this mutual growth between these two countries. Again, just for example's sake, let's say Nigeria and Kenya, two of the economic powerhouses on the continent. So I think that's one, but one of the most exciting things I think for me is for CBDCs to drive efficiencies in the remittance space. So we were talking about the fact that, it takes, on average, it'll cost about, these UK diaspora, this US diaspora who are sending money back home. On average, it'll take about 10% that's just being eaten off. And a lot of times, these obviously on aggregate, these are massive flows. But the average person is, working, saving a little bit extra, sending $100, $200 home. And if somebody is taking $10, $20 off the top of that, it's a significant amount of value they're just, taking away from you. Now, imagine, right? Let's just call the remittance inflows to Africa from like the UK. Let's call it, for argument's sake, $1 billion a year, which is far more. Just by introducing, the CBDC tech, improving that remittance flow, we could add $100 million like that to the African economy, because that 10% that leaking to these remittance providers, etc., who are all sitting in these first world countries, now comes directly into the African economy. That mother who's receiving the money from her son in the UK now has an additional $10 to $20 to spend in that economy, which is going to the next vendor, it's going to the grocer, as opposed to being extracted out of Africa and sort of siphoned back to these remittance providers, etc. So I think those are probably the two most immediate efficiencies that I hope to see. And if they do, I think the marginal benefit from that will be huge for Africa, huge.
All right. Well, interesting. That's really interesting. Actually, we are seeing, African governments, suddenly, even changing tunes, because you remember even in Nigeria how, the government was so much against crypto and all that. In Kenya, as recently as last month, even the CBK government was talking about how, they're not open to, crypto or any form of digital currency. So, I mean, why the sudden change of tune? And, for example, in Kenya, why the sudden change of tune?
I think the change of tune is cryptocurrency is ripe for it has become ripe. So you cannot go against the tide. You flow with the tide. So now the tide of the cryptocurrency and blockchain technology is here, because you see we are gearing up to the fourth industrial revolution, where the robotics, cryptocurrency, blockchain, artificial intelligence will reign supreme. So the central bank has realized at the end of the day we have to go digital. And also the pandemic. The pandemic has also accelerated the digital era, the post-pandemic era. You see everything all right now is almost cashless. So the pandemic in a way has accelerated the digital movement. So I think that's why the African governments are changing tune about the digital assets. And so as IMF, so IMF was the IMF was one of the bodies that was against was lukewarm. Was a bit lukewarm about cryptos, but now it's in full gear about the CBDCs. So I think that's why you're seeing a change in tune about the digital assets, CBDCs, cryptos like Bitcoin, NFTs, all these in the crypto space.
All right, Brenton.
Yeah, no, so I actually completely agree with Brian. So, a year ago, 2 years ago, there was still, a lot of this rhetoric, Bitcoin is funding these illegal activities. It's, it's not legitimate.
And all that.
Exactly. But I think over the last 2 years, we've seen this explosion in the formalization of digital assets and blockchain, right? We've seen everybody from like the likes of JP Morgan moving into the metaverse, you know, all of these. I think there's currently about 81, if I'm not mistaken, countries that are in the process between research and implementation for CBDCs around the world. And even if you look at the global, and I think this is probably the biggest driver, the global regulatory framework. So once you get regulatory clarity, then the big players are really willing to put some money on the table and look at creating new business models, etc. Because before that, they don't really know if it's worth it to them. And one of the biggest drivers we've seen is over the last year, which has aided this sort of, you know, bringing Bitcoin, crypto, and blockchain to the fore, has been one, a lot of these blue chip companies entering the space. Two, I think a lot of clarity coming in regulation. So it's now no longer viewed, that whole narrative has changed from this Ponzi scheme thing to, okay, this is a legitimate technology that has the ability to really transform, you know, the way we do certain things. And that shift in narrative, I think, combined with the fact that other people are doing it, you know, Bitcoin is famous and crypto for its game theory. So, you know, you've got to be that next player to move, because the later you make that move, the more value you're going to lose out on. So I think probably clarity in regulatory states, the adoption from your blue chip companies, not only in terms of investing, but actually building solutions in the space, has really woken governments up to the fact that, hey, you know, this is not just some fly-by-night thing under the bed. You know, this is, you know, as potentially as revolutionary as the introduction of the internet. And I think they're starting to now realize that.
No, interesting. I follow the, you know, they call themselves the Atlantic Council, who do a very interesting, you know, track, and basically track, you know, the adoption of CBDCs, you know, across the world. And they were saying, you know, but 87 countries, that's representing around 90% of the global GDP, are exploring CBDC. And in May 2020, only 35 are considering a CBDC. And they're also saying 9 countries have not fully launched digital currency. And of course, Nigeria being the latest country, you know, to do that, or with the e-naira. And you know, they're talking about how 14 countries, including China and South Korea, are now in the pilot stage with their CBDCs and preparing a possible full launch. So those quite are very interesting numbers. Actually, it gives you a clear, you know, representation of, you know, of where we are heading.
Exactly. So I don't think people understand the scale at which this thing has already permeated the world, like you said, right? And the speed at which that happened. I think Brian was spot on, is that COVID really accelerated a lot of the digitization, right? So as you said, I mean, look at the growth in numbers from May 2020 to where we are now. It's unbelievable.
Brian, I mean, from, you know, basically the figures I gave, you know, what does it, I mean, it gives you a clear picture of where we are heading. And I'm looking forward to seeing, for example, how, you know, if other countries are just with Nigeria and Kenya, of course, leading the way, and down in South Africa, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, what other countries are going to do, you know, moving forward. What should we expect?
I think what we should expect is a roller coaster ride on the CBDC adoption on African soil, because as we have seen from the Nigerian perspective, Nigeria is expecting a huge GDP growth. And so Nigeria has set the ball rolling. So I know other countries like Kenya, South Africa, it's just a matter of time. And before we join the CBDC bandwagon, and then other African countries will join in. Because, for example, I was doing a research about the Bank of Japan. Was saying they need to collaborate with Europe and the US for the CBDC to be implemented in full scale. So I think the CBDC implementation will require the collaboration of many African countries, because you see, for cross-border transaction, all these agreements are needed for full implementation. So I think we're in the digital era, the post-pandemic era, where the things are moving digital. For example, the cloud computing. I can enter on the cloud computing. Many companies are entering the cloud computing because work from home is the norm. So you also expect on the crypto space, the CBDC adoption, the crypto, the other digital assets like Bitcoin. And that's why you see many companies entering the metaverse. The likes of Nike, all these guys. Even you saw that the other day, Warren Buffett, back in the day, he used to call Bitcoin rat poison, but he changed the narrative. The narrative
Yeah.
the narrative changing. So we expect these things to stream in on the African soil. So change is inevitable at the end of the day. Change is inevitable.
Oh, interesting. And actually, one would ask, why would a government get into virtual currency?
So that's actually a really interesting question. And funny enough, I actually used to give lectures previously on CBDC. So when we really saw this explosion of interest in CBDCs, it was almost directly correlated to the announcement of, if everyone will remember now, Facebook's Libra project, where they were trying to create this world reserve currency. And I think from there, and a lot of the research they put out really opened the eyes of a lot of sovereign governments to, what this technology could drive. But, just to give you some top level from a government perspective, right? If I'm sitting in the government now and I need to sort of convince people, why is it we're implementing a CBDC? Crypto aside, blockchain aside, take out all the great things that us Bitcoiners love to talk about. I think there's a lot of key things that traditional governments do that become a lot easier with this. So one of the first things is reduced payments and transaction costs. So I was telling you, the cost of handling cash in developing markets is generally around 3% of GDP, which is huge. That's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that is just being lost, that could be added productively to the economy. So that's one point. Then another very, very interesting point that a lot of governments were exploring, but they haven't really implemented in any way yet, is how much efficiency the central bank transacting directly with an individual retail user can achieve, right? So let me give you some examples. If I as Brenton had an official wallet address that acted as my bank account, things like the government automating tax returns, for example, would become so easy. And I mean, obviously it probably wouldn't look like this, but in a crypto sense, they could just send a transaction request to your MetaMask for you to pay your taxes, that you could just sign on your MetaMask wallet. And, that would make the entire process far more efficient. Even things like your transfer payment. So social grants, it's a very big headache for this population who's generally, quite disadvantaged in certain centers. They may be, in terms of disabilities, it may be in terms of age, especially things like pension payments, grant payments, etc.
Yeah.
The process is archaic in Africa at the moment. Generally people have to actually set aside 2 days for them to go and collect these grants. By the time they book taxis, they've gone out into the city 3, 4, 5 hours. But with a CBDC and a registered wallet account, for example, a grandmother sitting in a township who needs to collect a grant payment, that could just immediately be dispersed to a wallet address. She wouldn't have to go anywhere. She wouldn't have to sign any forms, because obviously all of that identity, etc., will be linked to her wallet. So it does make the government's job, to be honest, far, far easier and far cheaper. So everything from improving the way that taxes are done, improving the way social and welfare and grant payments are dispersed, even simpler things like, for example, if there's a particular segment of your population that you need to maybe sort of spur some economic growth in, let's call it maybe the 25 to 35-year-old population.
Yeah.
With an attached address, I could actually, apply different tax regimes, etc., to different groups of people without having to go through, if you had to try and do that in the traditional method now, like people would literally be filling in their age on their tax return. You would probably have to go verify that with the central database. Yeah. But now it's literally like a data science call. You go filter all that meet this criteria, push $100, boom, done. So I think there's a lot of benefits for governments to introducing CBDCs. And these are often a lot of the things we don't talk about, right? Because we will go, decentralization, 24/7, transparency, immutability. But in terms of governments, these are actually the key things that are driving them in this direction.
Right. All right. And maybe just to go back, again, maybe Brian can maybe jump in on this. I mean, don't digital currencies already exist? I mean, why do we need a CBDC?
Oh,
Already.
so before Brian jumps in quickly, I just want to say this is actually it was one of the, I told you I was doing HTTP lectures on CBDCs. This is one of the points that I brought up. So people still think that all of the money in the world exists in notes and coins. I think, I may be wrong on the figure, but according to a Time article, when I was putting these articles out, these lectures out, I think it's only about 8% of money exists in its physical currency equivalent. So 8% of money in the world is printed notes and coins. The other 92% of money is nothing else but zeros and ones sitting on your bank server somewhere. It is 100% digitized. There's no physical 10 Rand note, 100 Naira note, 20 Kenyan shilling note that sits behind that. It's literally just ones and zeros. It's code sitting in a bank server. And like you said, it's already 100% digital. But I think some of the efficiencies that, sort of basing that on a DLT or blockchain tech gives is it removes a lot of these silos, right? So as a bank now, for example, if I want to send Brian money, this happens in a minute, we don't see it, but even though it's digitized, someone in my bank has to go, okay, Brenton has this amount of money, okay, I'm gonna allow him to send it, okay, he can send it to Brian. So once they're done signing off, the money goes, into the abyss, it goes through some payment network people who also take a cut and they'll sign off. And then Brian on the other end, his bank will say, oh, where's this coming from? Brenton. Okay, we'll accept it. How much is it for? Okay, it's fine, we'll accept that. So all of these intermediaries, although we're completely digital, are still required to get money from point A to point B. And again, they extract a lot of value in that process. So exactly as Brian said, we can remove a lot of these middlemen activities, even in that digital process, by sort of basing it on this blockchain DLT technology.
Okay, interesting. Brian?
I think the CBDC, the CBDC adoption, I think the narrative about the CBDC will accelerate the cryptocurrency adoption. Because now, if somebody we can transact through an e-wallet, an electric wallet, or I can send you a digital shilling. Now that narrative will accelerate the crypto adoption, because people now will come to understand more. What does the crypto space have to offer? What's all this about centralization? What's all this about decentralization? What's all this about eliminating intermediaries? So I think at times one requires first-hand information. So I think CBDC adoption will accelerate that narrative about understanding what the crypto space has to offer, what's new in the digital era, and I know by so doing, we'll see more growth on African soil in terms of GDP, in terms of cross-border payments, and all these things. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben. Maybe just as we wind up, let's talk, for example, e-Naira or just any other CBDC in general. I mean, maybe all of you can actually jump in, with this, starting with maybe Brian. How do they work? How do CBDCs work? Like the e-Naira, for example, how does it work?
So I think how the e-Naira works, the Central Bank of Nigeria has given some financial institutions the mandate. For example, there you go, you open a bank account with an ID. So the financial institutions that are mandated to help with the e-Naira are given you authenticate with the ID. Then they create a digital wallet that is linked to your bank account. And so by so doing, now you can transact the e-Naira. E-Naira is just the digital form of the Nigerian currency. So all you need is a digital wallet to transact, and maybe the way you can go and scan a barcode. So that's the only difference with the physical Naira. Because it carries the same weight as the physical money, only that this one is just digital. And for you to use it, you have to have a digital wallet. So I think that's the big difference as for now.
Oh, okay, interesting. Brenton, I mean.
Yeah. Look, so I think one of the more interesting ones that I've been quite looking into quite a bit, and Brian's chatted on CBN, is I think the CBK discussion paper that came out, so the Central Bank of Kenya, and they made some really interesting points. So the key objectives with this is really, they said cost reduction, interoperability, and improving cross-border remittances. So I think they're hitting the nail on the head in terms of, what their stated objectives are. But what really excites me, I think Kenya is the perfect place for the adoption of a central bank digital currency, because like we already chatted about, M-Pesa really is the e-money success story of Africa. I mean, what they've managed to do there is nothing short of amazing. I mean, the M-Pesa story is quoted in a number of these global studies that I still read. So what they've managed to achieve is exceptional. I mean, even just flipping the entire traditional model on its head, right? So it's a payment system that is not financial institution run. It's a payment system that is telecommunications company led, which, we probably don't see that, but that is a huge flip on its head. And I think it feeds into what's going on there at the moment, because if you look at Africa, right, one of the key characteristics is we've got an exceptional growth rate in mobile penetration, in smartphone penetration. So over the coming years, the number of people who are likely to have access to a smartphone is probably going to be greater than the number of people who have access to a bank account. And if you look at this in Kenya, people have already made that psychological change to this digital money environment, full scale. And by introducing a digital currency, I feel like it's really just, M-Pesa was able to maybe take them from A, which is banking and normal banks, to B, which is far cheaper, far more efficient and better. But now with the introduction of the CBK, digital currency, they're looking to take that M-Pesa current situation and move it even more towards cost efficiency, transaction efficiency, and the rest of it. So I'm quite excited to see what Kenya comes out with. They've already stated, like Brian mentioned, you get these wholesale CBDs, these retail CBDs. So as we can see, this is going to be retail. But I think after the comments, we'll get a lot more clarity on the method that they're going to roll it out in. So I'm very excited to see what happens in Kenya. I think the original framework they put together is definitely in the right direction of where they should be heading. But now I think it all comes down to that implementation. So let's see, what that implementation looks like. So very excited for the Kenyan market, what's to come. I know you're out there in Nairobi, so very, very exciting times.
Yeah, and of course, really exciting times, and look forward to even getting to see what name CBK is going to give, that currency. And maybe, as we wind up, there's a question from Jeremiah. He asked me about, so what happens to traditional banks? Will they be dead?
Oh, so look, I think there's two parts that they can go. And funny enough, I've actually been chatting to some very, very large banks about this. Some of them are completely agree with me. Some of them don't. But banks sort of see their future in two potential ways, right? So banks as we know it are probably not going to, in my opinion, are not going to exist in the next decade. But where banks really see themselves fitting in the future, at least those who I've spoken to who are on board with this whole narrative, is that they're really going to become this software platform provider, essentially. So they give you a tool that will link up all these different services, be it the ability to purchase airtime, the ability to do this, the ability to do that, and just create this super money app. And they feel that that's really going to be their position in the market. And then there's still a lot of credit, lending, etc., where there's the opportunity to drive those efficiencies.
Okay, so maybe as we wind up, maybe just tell us how the situation down in South Africa comes to to adoption of CBDCs. Because we've spoken extensively about Kenya and Nigeria. So how's the situation down in South Africa?
Yeah, so look, so the South African Reserve Bank did some really nice proof of concepts, that took place, I think, just before COVID took hold. So one of the names, if the audience wants to look a little bit deeper into it, is Project Ikoka. So very, very interesting project. They try to take a lot from the sand dollar out in the Bahamas. And it was a successful proof of concept that they ran. But ever since then, there really hasn't been any further developments. And I think, probably one of the key reasons is, they had this successful proof of concept, and months later, COVID broke in. Then we've had, a number of regulatory challenges with bad actors in the crypto space. So I think their focus has slightly been diverted. But I think another important point to note is that in South Africa, I think we're quite privileged that our financial infrastructure is already quite sophisticated, right? So I think the need on the ground is not as pertinent here in South Africa, which is probably why they aren't driving it as hard. But I do think, once they get the crypto regulation right, etc., they're definitely going to start picking up those discussions again.
All right, thank you so much. Brenton. So, as we wind up, any closing remarks, Brian?
Thank you, Kanali.
Yes.
I think there was a question that was asked about the traditional banks.
Yes.
So I think the CBDCs, in a way, well, it's a double-sided sword. One way, it's going to affect the traditional banks because now the CBDCs will take their role. But now I think the way that traditional banks can survive with the CBDCs is giving incentives about interest on deposits. Because now, if they give interest on deposits, they'll entice people to remain on the traditional banking platforms. Also, I think the CBDC should be careful on the credit part, because you see, central banks cannot give people credit. Those are given by the banks, if it's loans and stuff. So I think it needs a delicate balancing act that traditional banks cannot be weeded off, because at the end of the day, they offer credit facilities to people, which central bank cannot be able to do. So I think it needs a bit of a delicate balancing act, but those are things that can be implemented after it's been rolled out.
All right, thank you so much, Brian. Brenton, any closing remarks?
No, look, I think I'm just going to say, and being crypto in Africa, I think this is the perfect platform. I am exceptionally excited, I think, for the next 5 to 10 years in the number of efficiencies that are going to be driven and the amount of value that's going to be created by CBDCs, blockchain and crypto technology as a whole here in Africa. So, I mean, just simple things like the new venture capital company I joined. There's so many amazing companies we've invested in Africa, companies building out remittance solutions using blockchain, companies that are building out alternative data marketplaces. So, people who transact with mobile money, one of the key issues they tend to have in certain regions is it doesn't build a credit history for you. So, you aren't able to access credit products. And what these people have done is essentially have aggregated all that information, created a credit score from it, and they've made it available on a peer-to-peer marketplace that financial institutions who want to offer credit to these segments of the population can just come, purchase data sets, and obviously based on that, offer them credit solutions. So look, I think there's so much going on in Africa, and we've already proven to the world that we are leaders in this space. So one thing I'm really proud of is for one of the first times in the technology sector, Africa is leading that adoption rate. So if you look at countries like Nigeria, right, some of the world's highest search activity on Google for Bitcoin, for crypto, for blockchain comes out of Nigeria. And looking in that top 10, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, even Egypt are often in those top 10 countries in the world looking for the stuff. And then if we look at adoption rates, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, once again, are leading some of the global superpowers like the US in terms of, the population's affinity towards cryptocurrency. And again, coming back to the point, I think it's really because here in Africa, sure, a lot of us love it as a new asset class, as an investment, definitely. But Africa is really proving to us the why of cryptocurrency. And I'm very excited to see the value that's created by that over the next 5 to 10 years.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Brenton. Remember, we've been hosting the second session, which of course, we're going to turn it into a podcast of the Crypto in Africa Talks, where we basically sit down and talk about, crypto in Africa and basically, the progress we are doing when it comes to adoption. And today, we've been talking about CBDCs, and I've been hosting Brian Njuguna, who is actually a crypto journalist based in Nairobi, Kenya, and of course, the head of development in Africa, Binance, Brenton Naicker. So thank you so much, guys, for joining in. Remember, this session has been proudly organized by Crypto in Africa and has been sponsored by Within Africa and Sportsbet.io in conjunction with BitCasino, the #1 crypto sportsbook and platform in Africa. So thank you much for listening and following. Remember, you can actually follow this discussion in case you missed it in all the podcast streaming platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcast, and YouTube, and basically all the other podcast streaming platform you may be using. Thank you so much for watching and listening. My name is Kanali. See you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you for watching the Crypto in Africa webinar. Be sure to join us in the next session happening again this coming Wednesday. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll be sure not to miss any future videos. Thank you.